Back in 2018, I made one of the dumbest and luckiest financial decisions in my life. I wasn't studying balance sheets. I wasn't analyzing companies. I wasn't reading financial reports. I was obsessed with one thing: how many shares I could get for $100. And when I discovered sub-penny stocks trading at 0.0001, my mind exploded, because at that price, $100 could buy 1,000,000 shares. 1,000,000. At the time, that felt powerful. Not because I understood the companies, but because the number itself felt massive. And honestly, I thought to myself, if this thing ever moves, maybe something unbelievable could happen. So I bought several companies, no strategies, no real plan, just numbers, hope, and curiosity. Then nothing happened. Days passed, months passed, then years. Some companies completely disappeared. Some went bankrupt. Some stopped moving entirely. Eventually, the excitement turned into discouragement. I stopped checking the account regularly. Sometimes I'll go months without logging in because emotionally it felt easier to ignore it than to stare at disappointment. At that point, I honestly considered the money gone. Just another lesson, another mistake, another random experiment that didn't work out. Or so I thought. Then one day, April 21st, 2021, I was sitting at home watching television, the financial channel that I usually watch on my off day. Nothing special, just an ordinary day, and randomly the thought came to mind: check your E-Trade account. I don't know why, but I grabbed my phone, logged in, and froze. My account value was over $9,000. At first, I thought something was wrong. I refreshed the screen, looked again, and the numbers were still there. One of the companies, GVSI, had suddenly exploded in value, and over the next several days, things became surreal. 9,000 became 23,000. 23,000 became 35,000. 35,000 became 46,000. And eventually the account crossed $60,000 from an investment I had almost emotionally abandoned years earlier. I just sat there staring at the screen, trying to process what I was seeing, because it didn't feel real. Now, looking back, I understand the OTC market very differently. At the time, I didn't realize I had accidentally positioned myself inside a speculative wave that would later attract massive retail attention. The OTC market is extremely volatile. These stocks can move dramatically, both upward and downward. And for every story like mine, there are many more where people lose money, a lot of money. Some companies dilute shares heavily. Some lack transparency. Some never recover. Some disappear entirely. And that's important to say honestly, because this wasn't some genius investing strategy. A huge part of it was timing, luck, and surviving long enough to witness the move. But there was still something psychologically fascinating about the experience, because when people see 1,000,000 shares, their imagination starts calculating possibilities. If this hits 1 cent, if this hit 10 cents, and that emotional excitement is exactly what draws many people into sub-penny stocks. Tiny price movements can create massive percentage swings. And during certain market cycles, that creates explosive momentum. But honestly, the biggest thing I gained from this experience wasn't the money. It was perspective, because this experience taught me something deeper. Sometimes in life, the things we almost forget about quietly develop in the background. Not everything grows immediately. Not everything reveals its value right away. Some things sit dormant for years before suddenly changing. And sometimes the breakthrough happens after you emotionally gave up expecting it. That's what made this experience unforgettable for me. Not just the numbers, but the feeling, the disbelief, the realization that life can still surprise you. Now, when people ask me about penny stocks, I try to give them balance. Yes, there's opportunities, but there's also risk, extreme risk. And if someone enters these markets emotionally without discipline, without research, or without understanding volatility, things can go very wrong. But my story is real, and it reminds me of something important. Patience matters. Perspective matters. Timing matters. And sometimes the things we almost give up on quietly grow in the background. This wasn't just a stock story for me. It became a life story, a reminder that uncertainty doesn't always mean failure, and that sometimes life is doing something in the background, even when you can't yet see it, because your story might still be unfolding too. Now, after that experience, people start asking me, so how do you pick stocks now? And honestly, my process today is still pretty simple, but it's a lot more intentional than it was back in 2018. Because back then, I was mostly chasing sheer quantity. Now, I pay much more attention to activity momentum and where attention is flowing inside the OTC markets. So one of the websites I personally use is otcmarkets.com. This site gives me a quick snapshot of what's happening across the OTC markets every day. And usually the first thing I do is move my cursor to market activities. Then from the drop-down menu, I click closing summaries. I quickly go to the advancer section. Now, this part right here is where the imagination starts kicking in, because the first thing I usually notice is the advancer section. And honestly, sometimes the percentage gains are insane. You'll see stocks up 300, 700, 1,000%, sometimes even more. And for a moment, I'll catch myself daydreaming, thinking, what if one of my companies did that? What if I was already sitting on that move before everybody noticed it? And that emotional excitement, that possibility is part of what attracts so many people to OTC markets, because when these low price stock moves, they can move violently. But after the excitement settles, that's when I shift my attention, because surprisingly, the place I actually spend more time looking isn't the advancer section. It's the decliner section. This is where I personally begin searching for potential opportunities, because I'm looking for stocks that still have strong activity, strong volume, and attention, but are temporarily down, especially companies trading inside my personal investment threshold, which is usually around 0.001 through 0.0009. That's the range I naturally pay attention to first, not because it guarantees success, not because I think every company will explode, but because psychologically, that's the price range where small moves can still create massive percentage swings. Now, let me say something important here. This is not financial advice by all means, and this market is extremely risky. A lot of OTC companies fail, some disappear completely, some dilute shareholders heavily, and many never recover. So I never want people watching this video to confuse possibility with certainty, because these markets are heavily driven by momentum, speculation, attention, and emotion. And honestly, luck still plays a role too, a very real role. But for me personally, this process has become something deeper than just chasing money. It's become a strange mixture of curiosity, patience, imagination, and observation because every once in a while, a forgotten company suddenly wakes up. And when it does, the movement can be unbelievable. At the end of the day, my story isn't really about stocks. It's about possibilities. It's about uncertainty. It's about patience. And it's about how quickly life can change when something finally moves after sitting still for years. That's why I still look. Not because I expect every investment to become $60,000, but because experiences like that permanently change the way you see potential. Sometimes the world overlooks things for a very long time before suddenly paying attention. And honestly, sometimes people do the same thing with themselves. So whether you're investing, building, creating, or simply trying to improve your life, don't underestimate the quiet seasons because some things grow silently before they grow publicly. And sometimes the breakthrough arrived long after most people stopped believing it would. Thanks for watching.